Welcome to today's episode of the ACT podcast, where we're going to be thinking a little more about what it means to live and teach faithfully as Christian educators in today's cultural climate. I am Lizzie, as usual, and today I am being joined by Ian and Mandy from the Naked Truth Project. Now, today's topic is one that many of us will find difficult to navigate, but increasingly teachers cannot avoid. We're going to be thinking about how we as Christian teachers can approach the subject of pornography in schools. Now, Mandy and Ian, welcome to the podcast. Can you just give us a really brief overview? Ian, perhaps you, what on earth is the Naked Truth Project?
Yeah, absolutely. Really great to join you on the podcast today. And yeah, Naked Truth is an organization that has been running for over a decade. And we aim to do two things: to open eyes and free lives from the damaging impact of pornography. So we are focused on that one issue of pornography, but we're trying to approach it as broadly as possible. So open eyes is education, awareness. That may be working in schools. We have a team of schools associates, which Mandy is one of, who will go into schools and teach lessons. But it's also working with parents and politicians, trying to help society as well as individuals understand some of the harms around pornography. So that's the open eyes bit. And then Free Lives is recovery and support, hope and healing for those who struggle with porn themselves. That's mostly adults. So individuals who are struggling, and also partners and spouses as well of porn users. So it's a niche topic, but we're trying to do as much as we can around that topic.
And you are a Christian organisation, although your services and your support is open to anyone, isn't it? Whether they have a Christian faith or not.
That's right.
Yeah, real.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously many teachers, including Christian teachers, will be facing this topic. It's quite a meaty one, isn't it? Through relationships and sex education lessons, through safeguarding concerns, or just conversations with students. This issue will be coming up more than ever. But why is it such a relevant and pressing issue for schools today? Why on earth should we be talking to students about pornography?
Let me start, and I know Mandy will have stuff to talk about here as well. I mean, if I just talk about the accessibility. So I'm in my 50s. So, pornography was a very different thing when I was in high school. It was still magazines, it was still DVDs and VHSs. It wasn't what it is now. It certainly wasn't. It was all analog, it wasn't digital, and it wasn't easy to access. There was a shopkeeper who was saying, "You're not old enough, sonny." So that has been one of the big changes that has happened, even in my lifetime, of really pornography moving from the sex shop and the top shelf to the smartphone. And that's significant, because what that means is now more than ever, young people and children have accessibility, anonymity as well, because no one needs to know, to unregulated content. So the Children's Commissioner here in England did a report last year where they said that 10% of children in the UK had seen pornography by the age of 9, and that went up to then 27% by the age of 13. So that was from the Children's Commissioner's report. One porn site, just one, sees over 150 million daily visits, which is basically more than the population of the UK, Canada, and Australia combined. Every single day, one website. And it's one of those user-generated YouTube type sites, which is free. And it's often those free sites which will be the ones, obviously, that young people will be accessing. So although that website hasn't released data around the ages of those 150 million daily visits, we would know, certainly anecdotally, as well as through things like the Children's Commissioner report, that is absolutely young people and children accessing as well as adults. Mandy, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, absolutely. The accessibility and anonymity is one thing or two things, but then the fact that what they're accessing is often so aggressive these days, it's violent, means that the attitudes of our young people when they're starting to learn about sex and body parts and things, that's all being shaped to help them to think something that we just don't really want them to think, that this violence should be a normal part of their future relationships. And so we worry that there is enormous emotional harm that comes as a result of seeing things way too young. As Ian's mentioned, that they're young. The average age of first exposure is around sort of 10 years old, often before they've hit puberty. And also because of the nature of lots of pornography, it can become highly addictive. And so you may have young people starting to watch things probably accidentally to start with, but they can become quite hooked quite quickly on finding more and more things, and then that addiction can carry on for years and can really then seep into their minds and their thoughts, the way they see other people, the way it affects their friendships, the way they react to adults, the way they react to teachers in their classroom. Lots of those things that they wouldn't maybe immediately trace back to the fact that they've been consuming pornography, but actually, if you were to pull those bits apart, the repetitive nature and the addictive nature of it means that they're starting to perhaps act out or verbally treat people or imagine things about people that are not the way we would like to be treating each other.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I remember, sorry, just to say, I remember
no,
NSPCC had a stat that relates to what Mandy's just said, where I think it's 44% of boys aged 11 to 16 in the UK reported to the NSPCC in this survey, this study, that porn had influenced the type of sex they wanted to try. So when we recognize what Mandy's saying, which is it's not just that it's more accessible, but it's become this very aggressive. 88% of porn videos show physical aggression. 97% of those that's directed towards women. What we're seeing is not just kind of topless pictures of women that I would have been looking at as a teenager in school. We're seeing this violent, aggressive content, and then that is shaping, as Mandy said, then what boys, for example, are saying, oh, well, this is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And for girls, equally putting themselves in vulnerable situations, going, well, this is what sex is, isn't it? And not necessarily being able to recognize that this might be toxic or harmful or aggressive or abusive. And so when you have someone who's not sexually active being shaped by something that is so distorted, we then start to see some of the things that I think, and whether that's in language or attitudes or actions, some of the things that probably are being acted out in schools. And I know listeners will have heard those comments and would have seen some of that behavior between boys and girls. And that's being influenced by pornography. I remember, again, that Children's Commissioner report, talking about a pupil who simply said, when I have sex, do I have to strangle my girlfriend? Because non-fatal choking is such a prominent part of pornography. And so again, just this sort of, it doesn't feel right that this is what I'm supposed to do, but this is all I've seen. And therefore I'm kind of saying, do I have to do this? Is this what I'm meant to do? So comments like that, I think, highlight the link between aggressive, distorted pornography and then expectations in real life relationships.
So let's just go back a bit, because
Mm.
I'm a little bit overwhelmed, I have to say. So I've got a son who's 9, nearly 10, and the idea of him accessing or seeing these kinds of explicit images and materials absolutely terrifies me. He's a very kind of naive young man, and I imagine that he would be very disturbed if he saw anything like that. How on earth do 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds get hold of this kind of extreme material? Because you don't just stumble upon aggressive pornography, or do you?
Well, there's a number of parts to that question that we could start to unpick. And we, as Ian mentioned to start with, we do a lot of work with parents who feel exactly the same way you do, Lizzie. And I'm a parent as well. And so there are certain things that we can put in place which help to prevent that kind of stumbling across. That's the obvious things, like making sure our internet service provider, controls are in place, and that parental controls are on every device, and those kind of things, and that children who come into our home who bring their own devices log on to our Wi-Fi, those sorts of things. That's one measure, if you like, that you could make sure there's that physical thing, that you've got your safe searches on, that you've got a YouTube safe search family, all those kind of things. So there's some things we can do there. Often it is, like we said, it's an accidental first exposure which piques a bit of curiosity. And that first thing could be a friend who has an older sibling who's shown them something. They've got a link. It's not difficult to send a friend a link on Snap or WhatsApp or somewhere else. Have you seen this? Oh my goodness, that kind of thing. And so, of course, a young child could just tap. That's all it takes, isn't it? Just a little tap just to watch it. And then, as we also know, once you've watched one thing, if it's perhaps on YouTube or plenty of social media things, the algorithm is to then just give you a little bit more. And so if a child is left with a device without sort of being perhaps in a public area where somebody else might interrupt them, they could just click and click and click, and then it doesn't take long, unfortunately, to be able to access things which escalate quite quickly, even though to start with it may feel a little bit more accessible. Ian?
Let me also just add quickly, that Children's Commission report was interesting in that it highlighted that actually where those younger children were accessing porn, it was often on social media sites rather than going to, a specific porn site, as it were. And so again, I think that's just another important thing for parents to be aware of, that that is possible to sort of see things online within social media sites. And although you have to be 13 to have an account, many social media users are under 13, and so this would be another reason just to kind of hold fast on that 13 rule, I would say. But also I think they're even putting in Google, just something fairly innocent. If you don't have Google Safe Search set up on your computer, or if you don't have some sort of parental controls, as Mandy was saying, something like screen time or well-being on Android, where it's going to filter out those kind of sites and those kind of searches. Yeah, as a 10-year-old boy, I would have found it hilarious to write bum into Google, and I wasn't looking for porn. I was just being silly. But what you get if you write bum into Google without any kind of restrictions will be that violent, aggressive. It is the first results because of the way that, so if
and why is that? Why are the most aggressive examples so popular?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the algorithms and the SEO and things that probably the kind of way in which the internet functions that baffles most of us, if we were really honest. We kind of know that we get marketed very specifically, and these are these are the things that if they're getting more search results because that's what adults are looking for, sure, they're going to be the same things that are going to then appear on just a general search from someone. Obviously, Google doesn't know the age of the person who's typing the word bum into there.
One of the things that we would, if there were one thing that we would try to reassure parents with, if you like, with this kind of fear around what's my child going to see, is to open up the conversation as early and easily as possible. I.e., that with your children, you're always used to making them feel they can talk to you about anything they've seen, any topic, that your love for them is never going to be conditional on anything, especially not things they've been sent or things they've seen, that that we remind ourselves and our parents who come to our workshops that to remind our children that that we're always on their side, that they are not going to be in trouble if they see something, because the chances are they will. They will see something at some point. It's probably not if, but when, and that it's okay for them to say, do you know, I saw this thing today. really, and actually it really bothered me. Or I couldn't sleep well last night. I had this nightmare. I think that's because when I was at my friend's house, we had a sleepover and we watched this film, and there were these scenes in there that I wasn't really expecting. And I don't know, should I have watched it? Should I not? And then our job is to step in towards with our love and our acceptance and our wow, that's tricky for you to cope with, isn't it? Gosh, and we're understanding and we're listening and we're trying to hear their side. We're definitely not telling them off and making them feel like they can never come to us again, because it's going to, the whole of their children's life, they're trying to navigate it. So they just need to know that we're safe people for them and that we can hold their big emotions,
Sure.
even if it's a tricky topic.
Sure. And I think as a parent, that's exactly how I would hope and pray that my husband and I will deal. And it's made me think, we perhaps need to be a bit more proactive about bringing this topic up with our children, particularly our son, who's nearly 10. And we can do that within the context of compassion and that relationship that is trustworthy and loving, and is ultimately within the biblical framework. And we teach and we speak from what we know of what the Bible says about healthy relationships and healthy sexual relationships. And I guess we're thinking as well in this podcast about how teachers who will be sort of exploring the tension between their Christian faith, perhaps what they would do at home with their own children, and what they're required to do by law, because I do believe that in RSE there are certain topics that should be taught, or that students should be made of at least the legal provisions around things like pornography, alongside other topics that are quite difficult to bring up. Particularly in online and media, teachers are supposed to be talking about specifically sexually explicit material and how it can be damaging, how it can negatively affect how they behave. How can we do that, do you think, as Christian teachers in an environment that often leans towards permissiveness? So we can see this is clearly a massive issue for schools that, yes, I think should be addressed. But how do we hold that tension of wanting to speak into this, but not knowing how, and not knowing how to create a space to talk about this without perhaps damaging integrity or perhaps being swept up in this permissive cultural narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I feel, with the RSE curriculum, there's probably some things that Christian teachers might find it more difficult to talk about. I actually think this is probably one of those ones where probably people of faith and the Department of Education are probably pretty much on the same page. Actually, this isn't maybe one of those things where you're going, oh gosh, I'm not sure if I'm in agreement with what I'm being asked to talk about here. Because the Department of Education, as you've already said, Lizzie, although the curriculum has been quite slow in coming in. It is there now in newer ways, and it will be talking about the harm. So it will be talking about how does it impact your physical health? How does it impact your mental health, emotional health? How is it affecting the way you see other people and see yourself negatively? And so it's probably easier compared to some of the other RSE topics to be able to talk about porn being harmful, and it being something that robs people and something that goes against human dignity and value and worth and all biblical principles and wisdom. And of course, the Bible doesn't talk about Pornhub, but it does talk about valuing other people and not objectifying them, or it does talk about justice, and it does talk about having a pure heart, which we understand to mean actually a whole heart, a complete heart, and so actually not kind of living one way and acting another way, and thinking another way, and these are all things which I think we can talk about under this heading of pornography that actually fit our beliefs as Christians. And so in some regard, I think a non-Christian teacher and a Christian teacher is likely to say similar things around this topic. And so,
one of the things I'd say, Ian, is I think I would agree completely. And actually, when I had a quick look through the guidance earlier,
yeah,
the guidance, and actually the two places where pornography is referenced is in the context of how damaging it can be, and that that these present a distorted picture of sexual behaviours, and that they should be taught what the law says about it. And absolutely, and I would say at the relevant age, at an appropriate age, those are wonderful things to talk to our young people about. I think what some of our members have come across is where perhaps the interpretation of that guidance by outside organisations has been rather different, and has been perhaps towards the permissive end of explaining how sex positivity can include pornography and the ethical production of it, and actually that's not in the guidance whatsoever. Now we can talk a little bit more about that later on, and about perhaps some of the damage limitation that is attempted through some of those approaches. But I suppose you're coming at that more fundamental level, where you see how pornography in and of itself is damaging, how it can lead on to how it can escalate, how it can become violent and aggressive, but also just how pornography itself degrades sexuality, degrades sexual relationships, how it can create secrecy, how it can have a really damaging impact on young minds, and of course adult minds as well.
And I think as well, just exactly as you're saying, Lizzie, it also, we can devalue ourself and somebody else. And of course, the pornography can really affect the way we see ourselves, the way our body is. And we can do this comparison thing. Young people can do that, this dangerous comparison thing where they think, well, my body's not like that. It's supposed to be more like what I see on the screen. And of course, that's not them learning how to value their own body, to appreciate its brilliance and beauty in the way it's been created. And equally, it's not teaching them how to value somebody else's body with a real whole 360 view of a whole person, not just the sexual side of somebody. But often in our sessions when we're in schools, we'll talk about that we're not just talking about photos or 2D images. We want to think about a whole person when we see them online. It's much easier to see them as just a sort of thing or a person when they are online, but we have to keep reminding ourselves, like we'll try and remind our students to do so. Let's just be a little bit more thoughtful about who we're seeing. This is a real person in front of us, a person who was born one moment, who has family, sisters, brothers, friends, hopes and dreams, skills. This is a whole person. This is not just a sexual object in front of you. So we really want to help our young people to value themselves and to value somebody else, which of course is in absolutely no way in conflict to anything that we would hold as a biblical principle.
Absolutely. Mandy, could you tell us a little bit more then about what you do in schools? Do you have a program? Is it an assembly? Oh, not an assembly. Would you go in for a session with a certain year group? What do you do?
I'd love to tell you about it. So just to preface it with, I am actually a French teacher in a school as well. So I am located in a school environment with pupils all the time where I have a different subject. And then I also work in all sorts of different schools, mainly from year 7 to year 13, although we have recently been approached by more teachers of slightly younger children saying, can you help us with discussing pornography with the older age of our primaries as well. So yes, we have particular sessions that are appropriate to different age groups that we run between 50 and 60 minutes generally. We try to work within the school timetable. Some schools like us to come and do an assembly type type lesson with 150 at once. And some prefer us to come and do class-based ones where we can have a bit more discussion. We have an interactive platform that we use called Mentimeter. So the pupils, depending again on the school, can interact with our slides. We can try and make it, we want to hear from them. We don't want it just to be us telling them stuff, but we'd love for them to be able to feedback and question us and, give us results on polls. So we have a number of different sessions. Our younger one is called Selfies and Sexting, So What? And so we start talking about the impact of our online persona. We talk about the legal limits of sexual activity, which is often a real surprise to some of them. They, think that they can be 14 and have sex, and we point out that that's not legal. And then our next session we call #NoFilter, and we try to help the young people question a little bit the influences of music lyrics or films that they see. And pornography, and we will define it, and we will share with them how much of an entertainment industry pornography is, and it's not a manual where you can learn about healthy sexual relationships. We'll really try to make that very clear to them. And then our slightly older session, usually year 10 and upwards, but often year 9 pupils, we deliver it to them as well. We call that porn. What's the big deal? Because we know that some young people, they come and sit at the beginning of our lesson with their arms folded, and they're like, seriously, why are we even having this lesson? No, it's not even a big deal. And so we just gently unpack with them over the course of 50 to 60 minutes why pornography is not good for them. We unpack what's in it and the impacts it has on them, and then how it was made. And actually, we take these slightly older pupils there on a journey where we end with talking about justice and human trafficking and modern day slavery. And at that moment, those kids who started with their arms folded are all ears, and they're pretty quiet, and they had no idea that what they may be clicking on and what they've maybe become addicted to, or at least habitually, regularly watching, had a foot in quite a dark and sinister world. And we don't shy away from making that clear to those older pupils that their behaviours, the individual click, really matters. And so we encourage them to be really thoughtful consumers about what they may click on. So they're the main sessions that we run in schools.
Okay, and how, so you said that you kind of get those that are perhaps, a little shy or a little exasperated to begin with, but then they slowly engage. And what do they say? What do they kind of say to you? How do they respond? I don't know, do you get much feedback, or is it a little bit awkward?
No, I think Ian would probably agree as well. We don't let it get awkward. It's
Sure.
quite kind of fun to start with. We'll let them enjoy the funny topic that it is, and our maybe second or third slide is, how awkward is this topic for you? And we'll make it clear that it's not awkward for us. Like, we're happy to use vocabulary, we're happy to talk about penis and vagina, and we'll use those words straight out with them so that they know that we're comfortable, and they generally ease into it. So yes, to start with, there's a little bit of banter between them, and they're like, oh, what are you going to write? But they sort of settle because I think maybe they just appreciate that there's a chance to talk about it finally. A number of them we know have been consuming pornography for a number of years, probably statistically, even if they're in our session in year 10. And maybe it's a bit of a relief that for some of them, like, oh, wow, finally we've got an adult who doesn't mind talking about this. In fact, she or he really wants to. And I can hear some stuff because I don't really quite know how to deal with this topic. And so we would like to present to them as sort of adults in the room, if you like. It's okay. We can talk about this, and we want to help you navigate it well. So here's some information. Let's throw it around. I would say that's generally the vibe. Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we there's a certain amount of banter that I think teachers feel more concerned about than we do. And often we will have, the teacher who'd invited us into the school or whatever. I tend to do more of those year group sessions. And so you've got a big assembly hall with a couple of hundred people in. And so there's going to be and we're encouraging some discussion as well. So there's going to be a bit of noise. And I think teachers always feel a little bit, oh gosh, were they being too noisy? And I think we're like, no, we recognize that this is important. thing for them to be able to talk about, and it's always on topic, and they listen when they need to, but we're okay as well with some giggling, and we're okay with a little bit of that, and think that's an important part of the process. But I'm just, as Mandy was speaking now, I was just remembering a story that one of our team shared not that long ago, that she finished a session, and she'd noticed towards the end of the session that one of the girls in a row had got quite upset. Like, she could see that there was tears in this girl's eyes, and so she thought, well, I am gonna just go and check if she's okay. And so she sort of went and just had a quiet word with her at the end of the session. Is everything okay? Was there something that came up that was triggered you or upset you for some reason? Was there something I said? I would want to make sure we're really sensitive to the things that we're presenting. And she's like, oh, no, it's nothing that you said. Everything you said was really, really important. It's just, I know I've got to deal with this. I know that this is something that I'm struggling with in my life. And I hadn't, as Mandy said, hadn't really thought through the implications of that. And just beginning to critically think about my actions had just been a real, like, oh my goodness, I need to do something, and there was a little bit of remorse and a little bit of, oh my goodness, I need to do something here. So I think that is a big part of our aim. We're certainly seeking to teach young people, particularly in that last lesson, but in all those 3 sessions that Mandy mentioned, teach them how to think critically, how to question what society is spewing out as normal, how to critique even some of their own thoughts and ideas that might seem really, just because you feel it doesn't mean it's necessarily the best thing for you. So to be able to question what they see, but even some of what they feel at times, is part of kind of growing up and hopefully having, because we talked about filters before in terms of on phones, parents sort of setting up filters on phones and computers. Our ultimate goal is we want young people to have internal filters. We want them to be able to filter what's around them. And so we can say, yeah, porn, good or bad, but it'll be something else in the future, so actually what we want to do is give them the tools to be able to question, what is this showing me? What is this teaching me? What are the messages I'm getting? How does that make me react and feel? How does that align with my own values about other people and myself? And helping young people question, I think, is a really important part of what we're doing. And again, I think thoroughly biblical, throughout scripture, whether that's the wisdom scriptures like Proverbs, or whether it's Jesus just constantly causing people to look at themselves and look at their heart and to reflect and to question something, not just accept what you're being told. It's by himself asking a question, and you just sort of say, okay, that is part of, I think, our goal is to equip young people to think critically about their culture and their society and themselves, and hopefully do that with wisdom. We often as a team think about what the Bible talks about as being, as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, and that kind of mandate that we have as Christians. And I think this is part of our role as teachers. I'm not a teacher, but Mandy is, or as parents, or as educators, which I would put myself in that bracket. We want to avoid those 2 extremes, of naivety. We want to be really honest about the reality of the world our young people are growing up in. There's no point sticking our head in the sand. We've got to be honest about it and not just hope it's not going to be my child or my class or my school. But at the same time, so in that sense, being, wise, but also, how do we not just compromise and accept it all and just say, well, that's just how it is. Oh, well. But to say, we've got, but also teaching young people to do that, to say, okay, you can question without having to be involved. You can explore without having to experience, so how do we teach young people? We'd never use this language, of course, but the principle of being as wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove, for me, is a goal for my children. You know, I want my girls. I've got a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old. I want them to be able to be people who are wise and innocent. You know, and I think society tends to say, well, if you want to be wise, you've got to have experienced it. You know, you only really understand something if you've experienced. So you'll only understand sex if you've had sex. And for us to be able to contradict that point of view, even, and just say, actually, you can be wise about sex and relationships without having to go there yet. You know, you can learn, you can understand. And that's what wise and innocent hand in hand can look like, I think. And so how do we do that bit? How do we have critical thinking without just moralizing, because we can't moralize in the school context in the same way. So how do we teach critical thinking? How do we help young people be wise? That's what some of the stuff we're trying to explore, I think, through our sessions.
And it sounds like you really helpfully just shed light on the reality of this. So the impact that, you know, the physical and relational impact that pornography has, the addictive nature of it, the way that it can often lead to more and more extreme manifestations, and the way that it can, you know, even have physical implications. I remember at one point talking to you, Ian, in another podcast we did, about some of those physical implications that many young people probably wouldn't even be aware of. And I suppose what I'm also aware of is that there are many organizations out there, and I know that you don't necessarily go into school as we are a Christian organization, but there are many organizations out there that would perhaps see pornography as a problem, or at least some of its iterations, but they would approach this in a very different way. So some research I did a number of months ago, I found one resource that was reasonably widely used in secondary schools. That was a task for students, I think, in year 10 to design their own ethical pornography. So to write a scene, directing it, you know, having a range of body types and having clear consent communicated. And I suppose, you know, as a Christian, that would completely fly in the face of my conscience. I wouldn't be able to stay true to my conviction. Now we know that the Department for Education does not expect that kind of teaching, but I guess it just shows that we are in a very we're in an environment where there's a lot of tension. We want to engage with something, and perhaps I think Christians fall onto that naive side where we think, well, actually, no, I've got control over my children, what they're seeing and viewing. My children don't even need to know about pornography, because I'm going to make sure that they're so tightly controlled that they'll never come into contact with that. Whereas perhaps others are thinking damage limitation. We want them to learn about a healthy range of, you know, body types and identities, etc. So therefore, we'll talk in a very positive way about sex and pornography, as long as it's in the right context with the right communication. But actually, neither of those sort of options are particularly wise. And I guess that's where people like you guys come in. So where can teachers find some kind of wisdom and training and encouragement? What kind of services do you guys offer?
Shall I carry on, Ian? Or do you want to go?
No, you go first, Mandy.
Well, just to repeat so we have sessions for our schools, which we've talked about already. So that's bespoke sessions for all year groups in secondary particularly. We also run workshops for parents via schools or also online. So at Naked Truth, we have an online parent workshop every term for parents of children 8 to 11s and parents of children 11 to 18s, and we'll run those on Tuesday nights every term. So that's on our website. And we work in schools, and we also work in churches, and depending on what the requirement is there. And then we have a whole load of options for people who maybe have found themselves in a habitual state that they'd like to get out of. But Ian, why don't you talk about the recovery side rather than me?
Sure. Yeah. So we do run programs, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, for people who are struggling with pornography themselves. Majority of those programs are online groups. So again, that same technology that has made porn accessible and anonymous and addictive actually can make support accessible and anonymous too. And so we've been running support groups online for the last decade, and that's been really, really important, both because it's enabled people maybe to get help before they feel able to talk to somebody they know in person. So to get hope that and help in that first step in online means, oh, okay, no one else in my life necessarily knows at this point. And rather than waiting to have the courage to tell somebody I know, I can actually start now. I can get help now, and I can start small there. But also, actually, what we find is that it's lots of people try and do this on their own, and that, because that feels preferable, because then I don't have to bring it out of the shadows and out of the secrecy. I'll just try and get this sorted myself. But most healing and transformation and freedom and change happens when people do that with others in community, and that's where, you know, we absolutely see a massive change for people who are struggling, because they're doing it in a group with other people who are struggling just like you know, like you are, and it's facilitated by one of our team who's has their own story where they've struggled too. Then the reality is everybody gets it, everyone's in the same boat, but you're not. So there's no shame, but equally you're not doing it on your own, and that seems to be really important shift that people need. But having said that, we do have a sort of video on demand course that's called Control Alt Delete. And that is just working through some videos and doing some stuff on your own. And if you wanted to, you could do that in partnership with somebody and say, you know, talk to me about this, let's discuss it. But particularly for young people, that's something a young person could access as well, because you don't have those extra safeguarding issues of doing something in person.
Absolutely.
There are other resources for young people as well. There's one called Fortify. That's another good resource that talks about this topic and gives young people ways to access help and things like that. So Control Alt Delete for us on the Naked Truth website. And also Fortify is another one, which is part of the Fight the New Drugs resources. And for teachers who want to understand this issue a little bit better and how to talk about this well with young people, Fight the New Drug is probably the other main resource we'd signpost you to take a look at, because there's a lot of good materials on there as well.
What's that called again? Sorry, Ian.
Fight the New Drug.
Fight the New Drug. Okay, that's really interesting, and I think that's really helpful, because I think often Christian or any teacher can feel very awkward, and I know you say that there shouldn't be that level of awkwardness, but that in reality there will be, and also perhaps that level of tension, thinking, goodness me, when is it, or is it appropriate for me to talk about these issues with a student? You know, when does this kind of cross the line into being inappropriate, safeguarding potentially, but actually being able to point them to something that is reliable and will be a resource, and they know is not going to be something that then leads them on to further inappropriate materials, which so many of the other kind of resources for young people.
Yes. So Fight the New Drug is not a Christian organization, but they're an American organization. So they actually openly state, you know, we're not associated to any faith or religion, because obviously the separation of school and state and all that,
of course.
and religion state. So they're actually quite openly saying we're using science and stories and statistics to unpack why porn is harmful. They don't have a pro-porn stance in any sense. So they wouldn't say, well, porn's bad, but as long as it's ethical, it would be okay. They would have an anti-porn position, not just an anti, you know, unethical porn position. And so again, I would feel like they were a safe sort of place to signpost people, but nothing, I think, is better than you know, embarrassment-free educators coming in and talking about this issue. And again, I think sometimes I'm always a little reluctant to, for example, because sometimes schools will say, can you just give us some lesson plans?
Yeah.
So that, and what will happen is if we give a lesson plan to a school, that will then get forwarded to all the tutors. Just do this in 10 minutes, in the next kind of PSHE tutor session. And the teachers don't really want to do that because they don't feel equipped and able to do that. And actually, it's not great duty of care for the young people either, because they need more time to process something so nuanced and complicated than 10 minutes in a tutorial. So that's where I think our place is. We feel that we are able to provide, a level of depth that would be hard to do in 10 minutes. We've got the expertise, but also we're quite happy talking about it. And so the best way to find out about our lesson materials is for teachers just to take a look at NT Education. If you search for Naked Truth, you might find that harder with kind of filters you've got on your phones and things like that. So our education stuff is labeled nteducation.org. There's an outline of all the lessons that Mandy spoke about there. There's testimonials from other schools and things like that. So if you are in a school thinking, actually, we do need someone to come in and do this, we also have funding, so we can offer in a new school a day of teaching for free. So there really shouldn't be any barriers, actually, for a school to say, yeah, come and talk about this issue. We don't want to talk about it, although we know it needs to be talked about. So come and do it, and it's not even going to cost your school anything. It can be an easy thing to pass on to your PSHE coordinator or to your head or whomever and say, this is an organisation that I think we can trust and we can get a free session.
Brilliant.
Can I also, I absolutely endorse everything Ian said, but also we've done some teacher training in schools, just to pick up your point there, Lizzie, where some staff just aren't really quite sure what to say and how to do it. So we've done that sometimes where a school has said, can you just come and train our staff, take the inset morning? And so whether or not they teach PSHE, we've been able to do some training for lots of staff. So that's another thing that I've realised I forgot to mention earlier.
Brilliant. That's excellent. And I'm sure that our members, ACT members, and other teachers as well, will be really keen to go and visit those resources and the website, and hopefully get in touch with you as well. So I know you've got to go now, so I just want to say a massive thank you for talking about this topic with us.
Thank you for having us.
Bless you in all your work, and it's really, really needed, and I'm very pleased you can do it, and I'm not there doing it. Bless you.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Lizzie.